Today we will be seeing the chapter Digestion and Absorption. It is the first chapter in your human physiology, which is an important chunk in your NEET syllabus. So to start with, let's look at what is digestion, how it is done, what are the various organs that are involved and what are the glands that are involved in it, how actually the digestion process takes place because of the secretions of the gland, how the food is absorbed, and finally we look at what are the diseases of the digestive system. So the first question we ask is why? So we know that the human body is composed of a lot of organic and a little bit of inorganic molecules, and our nutrition mainly consists of carbohydrates, proteins and fats. So all these macromolecules are incorporated somehow in our body to make up the human body, but these cannot be used directly and therefore they have to be broken down into smaller pieces, and that is done by this process called as digestion. So how? For digestion there are various organs starting from the mouth until the anus, which is the last part in the body, and we also have various glands that are associated throughout this alimentary canal or the digestive tract, and we also have biomechanical processes that help in the movement of these food. So first let's look at the organs that are involved. So starting with the mouth is the first portion of the alimentary canal. So alimentary canal is basically the digestive tract that starts with your mouth and ends in the anus. So the mouth is the anterior portion and the anus is your posterior end. The mouth is situated anteriorly and the mouth has, mouth is where you ingest the food, and then the mouth opens into a buccal cavity or the oral cavity which has your teeth and tongue. So tongue, as we all know, is a very muscular organ that is attached to the lower part of the mouth with the help of a frenulum. And our teeth, we have different types of teeth and they are situated deep in the socket in our mouth, and that type of arrangement where this teeth is situated in a socket is called as pecodont. And the different types of teeth that we have, it's called the heterodont. So the different types we have are incisors, canines, premolars and your molars. So we represent the number of these teeth. The formulae is called as 2123 by 2123. So what this actually represents is there are 2 incisors, 1 canine, 2 premolars and 3 molars, and it is split like this. So if this is considered, this is your mouth and this is your upper jaw, this portion is your upper jaw and this is your lower jaw. What you say is it's split half. So here you have a 2123, here you have a 2123, again the lower jaw you have a 2123, and then this side you have a 2123. So the different types of teeth that perform different functions is called, that kind of an arrangement in teeth is called as heterodont. And finally we are also diffeodont. So diffeodont means that you just don't have one set of teeth. So what happens is initially when the baby is born, it has a primary teeth, milk teeth or a deciduous teeth. So we know that deciduous trees shed their leaves. So similarly the deciduous teeth are also shed, and in the adult life as a child grows, it is later replaced by a permanent set of teeth. So an adult has around 32 teeth in the mouth composed of all these. The function of the oral cavity is to actually chew the food, that is called as mastication, and it helps in the swallowing of the food into the other organs, to reach the other organs of the digestive system. So the mastication is done with the help of the teeth. So another thing about the teeth is that it is covered by an enamel. The surface of the tongue has small projections called as papillae, and this contains your taste buds. So once the food has left the mouth, it enters into the pharynx. Pharynx is actually the common organ that is found both in the respiratory as well as in the digestive tract. So from the pharynx, it passes on to the esophagus, which lies behind the windpipe and your respiratory organ. So esophagus moves the food down from the upper regions of the digestive tract, that is your mouth and your throat, into your stomach, and the esophagus does this by a process called peristalsis, which we will look into a little bit detail later. So from the esophagus, it passes on to the stomach, and the food passing down from esophagus to the stomach is controlled by a gastroesophageal sphincter. Sphincter is basically an arrangement of muscles in a circular manner in the form of a valve. So relaxation or contraction of the particular muscles that help in opening or closing of whatever tube or duct that particular sphincter controls. So the stomach is a pouch like organ. So it's somewhat similar, like, it's similar to this shape. So this is your esophagus. So food comes from the esophagus like this, and this region is called as the cardiac region. This upper J-shaped region is called as the fundus or the fundic region, and finally this region which connects to the duodenum, this region is called as the pyloric region. And the food is the main place where the initial most of the initial digestion takes place here, mainly of the proteins, and then the food coming from the pyloric region is controlled with the help of a pyloric sphincter. So after your stomach, you start with the small intestine. So the small intestine is basically a length of thin muscular and coiled tubes that help in digestion and absorption of the food. So the small intestine consists of, it has the starting part, that is duodenum, and then it has jejunum, which is kind of a long coiled part, and then you have the ileum, which is also a coiled part, but it is highly coiled compared to the other regions. So from the ileum, it moves on to the large intestine. So this transition occurs in the cecum. It is followed by the colon. It has the rectum, and the outermost opening is called as the anus. So here in your colon, you have three sections of the colon, which are called as ascending, transverse, and your descending colon. So basically this region, it comes down like this, and then it kind of coils here like this, which is the small intestine, and then it passes on, and then it becomes the large intestine. So this is your duodenum, this region, and then here you will have both your jejunum and ileum, and this region, that is called the cecum. So the speciality of cecum is that it contains a lot of bacteria which helps you in digestion, and also the appendix, the vermiform appendix, which is a vestigial organ, is found in this particular cecal region. And this most of this large intestine is made up of colon. So this region is the ascending, and then this is the transverse, and then this is the descending colon, and finally rectum is the place where the fecal matter is temporarily stored before it is thrown out through the anus. Now, this is an overview of the different organs that are involved. Let's look at what is the musculature of this particular structure. So, when you take a cross section of a digestive tract, like from any of the places, there are basically 4 layers that you see. They are serosa, muscularis, submucosa and the mucosa. So, serosa is the outermost layer and mucosa is your innermost layer. So, serosa, it contains, it is the outermost region that is made up of something called a mesothelium. And mesothelium is the epithelial lining that you find in almost all the visceral organs. It is a very thin, light, whitish color sort of a sheath that you can find around all visceral organs. So, this is the mesothelium, and it has a little bit of connective tissue also. Next comes your muscularis. So, muscularis is quite important because it is because of this particular smooth muscle region that you see the movement of the food throughout the food pipe without any stop. So, how the muscularis is arranged is like when you see a cross section like this. So, it has 2 layers. So, the inner layer, it is composed of circular structures, like the muscles are arranged in a circular manner, while in the outer regions the muscles are arranged in a longitudinal manner. So, if you look at a pipe in this section, so basically you would have, they are not exactly rings, but I am putting this line in order to make you understand it is a circular arrangement, and the outside it will have longitudinal layer. The outside layer will have muscles in this form. So, earlier I told you about peristalsis, right. So, peristalsis is basically the food comes and then it is held in place. So, this circular area contracts. So, it contracts a bit and it holds the food. So, from there the longitudinal muscles kind of push the food and then this area relaxes and then the food is then moved to the next side like this. So, as it moves through, it is captured by the circular muscles and then it is pushed through by the longitudinal muscles. It is so complex that in certain places there is also an oblique arrangement of the muscles. Oblique is basically a diagonally arranged muscle like this, in addition to both the circular and the longitudinal. Then comes your submucosa layer. So, your submucosa, it contains blood, lymph, blood vessels and also your nerve connections. The submucosa has glands in the duodenum region and these glands are called as the Brunner's glands. And then finally is the mucosa layer. So, the mucosa is the innermost layer, so inside layer, and most of your glands that you see that help in digestion along the digestive tract are located in the mucosa layer. So, in your the modifications that you see in the mucosa layer is very diverse when you compare the different sections of the digestive tract. So, for example, in mucosa in the stomach, it forms a fold like structure that is called as rugae. And then if you look at the same kind of modification in intestine, it forms finger-like projections which is called as the villi. So, the finger-like projections, so basically finger-like projections are like this, and on top of that they also have little more projections in addition to the finger-like projections. So, this is the intestinal wall. These are the initial finger-like projections, and then you have something called projection from this villi, which is called as the microvilli. So, the reason for all these modifications is basically to increase the surface area of the digestive tract, which will maximize the absorption. and this particular this region is also supplied with lot of blood vessels. So in the stomach, if you see, the mucosa region houses all the gastric glands. Gastric glands in the stomach and also in the intestine, they secrete, for example, the glands which secrete mucus, all those are found in the mucosa layer. And importantly, there are certain cells called as crypts of Libercune that are actually found in this region. That is, if suppose this is the intestinal mucosa and this is the mucosal layer, there are certain dips like this which are called as the crypts of Libercune, and all these modifications help in the digestion of the food. So now let's look at specifically what are the different digestive glands. So as such, we have the three main glands that we are going to look at. So the first is your salivary gland, the next is your pancreas, and the third is your liver. So first, the salivary gland, we know it is located in the mouth, and it is the saliva is a secretion of the salivary gland, and it is made up of three pairs of glands. So the first pair is called as the parotid, which is located in the cheeks. The second is the submaxillary or mandibular. So this is located in the lower jaw. And finally you have your sublingual, which is under the tongue. So these glands that are not located outside, you cannot see the projections into the mouth, but they are located just below the coverings in the mouth, and they all secrete saliva, and through the salivary ducts they are actually poured into the mouth. Now if you look at the composition of a salivary saliva, you can see mostly electrolytes like sodium, you have a little bit of potassium, bicarbonates, and then you have enzymes. Salivary enzyme is called as ptyalin, and then you have the most important one, salivary amylase, and then finally you also have lysozyme. So the salivary amylase, it helps in the breakdown of polysaccharides, especially maltose, and then lysozyme has antibacterial activity. The saliva also has mucus. So mucus actually helps in the when you masticate the food, it helps in lubrication, as well as it makes the smaller particles of food to stick together so that it does not get lost in any other regions. The second is the liver. The liver is quite important because it is one of the largest glands in the body, weighing around 1.2 to 1.5 kilograms. And the liver secretes bile, we all know. So bile is composed of bile salts, bile pigments, and cholesterol, and it also has phospholipids. And bile pigments may be either bilirubin or biliverdin. And the peculiarity of bile is that it does not have any enzyme. So it's a non-enzymatic secretion. The liver is composed of lobules. So liver has two lobes. So you can imagine something like this. This is kind of the structure of the liver. So it is located on the right side of the body, just below, inside the rib cage, just below the diaphragm, and it has two lobes. The liver has two lobes, and the arrangement of the cells is in the form of lobules, because you see it like this kind of. And all the hepatic cells are arranged like this. So this is the area through which the bile actually flows, this region. Okay, and all these bile is carried through the bile duct, and it is stored in a small pouch like structure that is called as the gall bladder. The lobules are covered by a very thin capsule that is called as Glisson's capsule. So it kind of holds everything together in the liver. The gall bladder helps in storage, and then finally when the secretions come out, so the duct from the gall bladder is called as the cystic duct, and along with the duct from the liver, hepatic duct, it together forms the common bile duct. So this is the duct which actually joins with the pancreatic duct, and they form the hepatopancreatic duct. So the secretions from the liver and the gallbladder, so basically the bile juice is poured into the duodenum. So what does the bile help in doing? The bile helps in digesting the fats, especially fats, and it converts them into di and trisaccharides. It helps in digesting fats into di and triglycerides. And the next one is pancreas. So the pancreas is a small, thin, long organ that you find just below the stomach. So the pancreas are very special because it has both an endocrine part as well as an exocrine part. It has exocrine as well as the endocrine portion. So the endocrine portion, it secretes hormones like insulin and glucagon, whereas it is the exocrine part that is useful in digestion. It gives rise to the pancreatic amylase, pancreatic juice. So the pancreatic juice has some set of enzymes which can be remembered by a short thing called plant, but with a C. So your T is trypsinogen, N is nucleases, C is carboxy, P is procarboxy peptidases, L is lipase, A is amylase, and finally C is your chymotrypsinogen. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. These 6 enzymes come under the pancreatic juice. So the pancreatic juice is poured into the duodenum through the pancreatic duct, and the pancreatic and the bile duct combine together to form the hepatopancreatic duct. Hepatopancreatic duct, and the secretions are controlled by a specific sphincter called as the sphincter of Oddi. So the secretions from both the liver as well as the pancreas is controlled, the flow is controlled with the help of sphincter of Oddi. So if you look at, so these are the main glands in the digestive tract. Now let's look at what is the actual digestive process that takes place in different parts. So the intestine also secretes, has a lot of secretions, but as such You would not consider them as glands specifically. So under glands you will have only pancreas, liver and the salivary glands. So intestinal secretions and glands we will look at during the digestion process. So the digestion process starts in the mouth. So as I already told you what are secretions of the mouth and what is the pH and what it does. So the mouth makes, after masticating the food, it becomes something called as the bolus, and it is actually the amalgamations of all the smaller particles, not exactly digested particles. So in the bolus it helps in the easy swallowing of the food. So swallowing is also called deglutition. So deglutition is the scientific term for swallowing. And if you look at in the mouth, the main enzyme is the salivary amylase, which helps in the digestion of starch or your carbohydrates. So the pH requirement for this enzyme is 6.8, and it converts the starch into disaccharide called as a maltose. And the mucus in the mouth, as I told you earlier, helps in lubricating, and then it helps in the deglutition process. If you look at the next part, that is the stomach. So we know there are various layers to the stomach. So the mucosal layer in the stomach has 3 types of cells. First is the neck cell or the goblet cell, which secretes mucus. The second is the peptic or the sheath cell, which gives the enzyme, proenzyme, which means it is an inactivated form of the enzyme called as pepsinogen. And then finally you have the parietal or the oxyntic cells, which help in the secretion of the hydrochloric acid in the stomach, and it also gives rise to something called as the intrinsic factor. Intrinsic factor helps in the absorption of vitamin B12 later in digestion. So what actually happens? What are the functions of these? So the mucus actually helps in stomach protecting the mucosal lining in the stomach, and it also helps in the lubrication. It also gives a little bit of lubrication for the digestion process in the stomach. And the HCl provides the optimum pH for activation of the pepsinogen. So pepsinogen is the inactive form of the enzyme peptin, which is a proteolytic enzyme. So the protein digestion happens first in the stomach. So pepsinogen, it gets converted into pepsin in the presence of HCl. So now what the pepsin does is it acts on proteins. So it acts on proteins to give 2 things, peptones and proteases. Sometimes along with the other enzymes in the stomach, you can also see another enzyme called as a renin. Not to be confused with the other renin that is associated with the excretory system. So the renin is an enzyme which helps in the digestion of milk proteins, and it is usually found in the digestive systems of infants whose primary source of nutrition is the mother's milk and other sources of milk. And sometimes, and along with the other enzymes, you also see lipases, which is an enzyme that helps in digesting the fat. So all the so a little bit of digestion takes place in the stomach, and the semi-digested food passes on to the intestine. This semi-digested mass is called as your chyme, and this chyme then passes on to the intestine, that is starting with the duodenum. to the other part to the other parts like jejunum and the ileum with the help of the muscular movements of the muscularis layer in the digestive tract. So when you look at the small intestine, the digestive process of the small intestine, I already told you the enzymes. So you have lipase, pro-carboxypeptidase, amylase. So here the amylase is differentiated from the salivary amylase because it is the pancreatic amylase. You have the nuclease. This is the trypsinogen and the chymotrypsinogen. So these are poured into the duodenum, and the first enzyme, so all these are in the inactive form. So first enzyme to get activated is your trypsin. So trypsinogen. So trypsinogen is activated into the form of trypsin by the enzyme enterokinase. So these enzymes are secreted by the cells that are present in the intestinal mucosa. This trypsin on the other hand activates all the other enzymes that is present. So chymotrypsinogen, it becomes chymotrypsin, and your procarboxypeptidases becomes carboxypeptidase. So this trypsin, chymotrypsin and carboxypeptidase help in the digestion of proteins. This amylase is for your carbohydrates, the nuclease is for the nucleic acids, and the lipase is for the fat. So now let us see the actual digestive process that takes place. And if you look at the general pH of all these enzymes, they require an alkaline pH. So this should be, so this is completely different from the environment in the stomach, which is basically acidic pH of 1.8. So here you have an alkaline pH for the activation of these enzymes. So from the stomach, we know that in the chyme there will be a little bit of protein. You will have proteases and also your peptones. So all these will get converted into dipeptides. So here the enzyme chymotrypsin, trypsin and carboxypeptidase will help. The next comes your carbohydrates. So polysaccharide, that is digested with the help of your pancreatic amylase, which gives rise to disaccharides. So disaccharides are maltose, sucrose, your lactose, all these. And then you have nucleic acids that is acted upon by the nucleases, which gives rise to nucleoside and nucleosides. And then finally you have fats. So fats are acted upon by lipase and it gives rise to diglycerides and triglycerides. So these are the digestive products that you get at the end of digestion that takes place in the duodenal part, the initial part. Then it moves on to the ileum and the jejunum, so where the last step of the digestion takes place. So in deeper regions, the pH increases to as high as 7.8. So here the intestinal juice, also called as the succus entericus, has lots of components which help in digesting these. So you have dipeptidases, you have disaccharidases, we have nucleosidases, and again we have lipases. So all these enzymes help in the further digestion. So for the first is your dipeptides, which will be acted upon your dipeptidases, and that will give rise to your amino acids. And then disaccharides, you have maltose, you have lactose, and you have sucrose. So maltose will be acted upon by maltase, which is maltose is actually combination of two glucose molecules. Lactose by lactase, which is a combination of glucose plus galactose, which is the milk sugar, and you have sucrose, which is digested by sucrase, that is made up of glucose and fructose. Then you have your nucleosidases, nucleosides and nucleotides, which are acted upon by the nucleosidases and which gives sugars plus the base. And then carried over from the last digestion, you have diglycerides and triglycerides, which are acted upon by lipase, and that gives rise to fatty acid plus the glycerol. So the enzyme Succus intricis is given out by the cells of the intestinal mucosa, and you also have certain mucus cells called the goblet cells that are present there. So the mucus in the intestinal juice helps in the easy passage of the food, and it also gives that particular 7.8 pH for the digestion to take place. So after all these processes, all these digestive processes are done within the ileum. So after ileum you have the cecum. So what happens is the undigested food at this point gets transferred to the cecum through the ileocecal valve. So this valve actually prevents the backflow of the undigested matter back into the intestine. So from the cecum it travels all the way through the large intestine. So in the large intestine there is only limited absorption that takes place. So there are two main things that is a function of the large intestine. First is the absorption of some water, some of the drugs and some other nutrients that could be absorbed back. And the second is the actual passage of the undigested fecal matter through the large intestine because of the contraction, and it helps in the it helps in all the undigested particles to actually stick together with the help of some mucus. So large intestine absorbs water, some drugs and some vitamins, and then finally you have the movement of undigested food together. The undigested food matter is called as the fecal matter. It is stored in the rectum until defecation. So the control of this digestive process can be either neural or hormonal. There are two types, neural or hormonal. The neural is, suppose when you look at food, when you have the sight of food or the smell of food, or when you hear about people talking, you can see that when you even sense smell the food, you can see that the salivary gland starts secreting the saliva. It is because of the neural stimulation of the digestive tract, and also when once this saliva starts secreting, you also have the digestive enzymes in the stomach that are secreted, that again is part of the neural control of digestion. The hormonal control is because of certain hormones that are produced locally within the stomach and the intestinal mucosa. So the neural control also helps in ejecting out the matter. So when the undigested food particles the fecal matter is in the rectum, there is a neuronal nerve reflex or neural reflex that is caused that gives a sensation for the ejection of this fecal matter, and that is called as defecation, and this is a voluntary process that is under the control of the particular person. The next is something called as assimilation. So once these particular food is digested and it is made up into simpler molecules, the usage of these particular molecules by the body for various processes in the body is called as assimilation. So how are these final digested molecules taken up by the body? So there are three main methods that are followed. So the first is passive transport, the second is active transport, and the third is facilitated transport. So we know passive transport is along the concentration gradient. So because of the difference in concentration of two sides, so it might be inside or outside of the cell or between two mediums of the body fluid, there will be transfer of certain molecules. So mostly a little bit of glucose, amino acids and ions like chloride are transported by the passive process. But some molecules cannot be transported as such, and there is a requirement of a carrier protein which helps in carrying these molecules. So for example, most of the glucose and amino acids are carried by carrier proteins, and this type of transport is called as a facilitated transport. Active transport involves the movement of the molecules against its concentration gradient. We already saw passive is towards. So active transport requires energy in the form of ATP, and some of the molecules that are carried through active transport are sodium, glucose and amino acids. So these are the basic molecules, but the fat molecules that are produced or the fatty acids cannot be mixed with the blood because they do not mix. So what happens is the fatty acids that are produced are first incorporated into a small molecule that is called as a micelle. So micelle is basically made up of fatty acid molecules that have different polarity. So the fats which are digested into smaller particles are incorporated into the micelles, and then the micelle are again broken down further into smaller particles called as chylomicrons. These chylomicrons have a layer of protein around it, and these chylomicrons are absorbed by the lacteals or the lacteal ducts, which are basically the lymph vessels within the villi. These chylomicrons are then processed by the lymph vessels, and then later they are given into the blood. So again, to reiterate, the process in which all these molecules are transported via the proper mechanisms and absorbed into the body and used by the body for its various mechanisms is called as assimilation. And this process takes place in different parts like the mouth, stomach, small intestine and the large intestine, but most of the absorption takes place in the small intestine. Last is the diseases and the disorders of the digestive system. So the digestive tract can get inflamed either because of a bacterial or a viral infection, or sometimes it can even be attacked by parasites such as tapeworm, hookworm, roundworm, pinworm, etc. So some of the different processes we see are vomiting. So vomiting is basically ejection of food through the mouth from the stomach, and this vomiting is controlled by the vomit center that is at the medulla in the brain, and before the actual act of vomiting you get the sensation of vomiting that is called as the nausea. Then you have diarrhea. So diarrhea is indicated by increased frequency of the bowel movement and also the increase in the water content of the bowel movement. So what happens is, all the food that even before absorption and assimilation can take place, they get defecated out of the body, and therefore diarrhea will lead to decreased absorption. Third is constipation. So if the fecal matter is retained in the rectum for a longer amount of time, it will lead to constipation. So what happens is, most of the water will be absorbed and there will not be enough lubrication for the fecal matter to be passed out, and this can also occur because of irregular movements in the rectum. Indigestion. Indigestion is the improper digestion of food that occurs in the stomach. So there are various reasons for indigestion, like lack of enzymes, spicy food, excess food, and sometimes even stress or anxiety can also cause indigestion. And finally, you see jaundice. So jaundice is basically the inflammation of the liver, and it leads to excess bile secretions. So because of the excess bile in the blood, it gets deposited in the skin as well as in the eyes and in the nails, and they appear yellow. And so these are some of the disorders that you see in the digestion system. We come to the end of this chapter. So first, initially we saw what are the organs that are involved in the digestion, what are the different glands that are involved, and then we saw how the actual digestion process takes place in the mouth, in the stomach, in the intestine, and finally in the large intestine. And then we learnt about how the digested food particles are assimilated, and then we see some of the disorders that can be seen in the digestive system. Thank you.